back, everyone, and I want to welcome you to our ECU Anthropology Alumni Lecture Series, our 5th annual Alumni Lecture Series, and it gives me a privilege to introduce our next speaker, Lauren Souther. And before I introduce her, just a reminder that the purpose of the ECU Anthropology Alumni Lecture Series is designed for former ECU Anthropology students to share their expertise and experiences to current anthropology students who are preparing to graduate or who are anticipating to graduate in the next few years. We hope this lecture series, the 5th one, creates more of a constructive, practical dialogue between recent ECU anthropology majors, graduates with current anthropology majors. With our next speaker, we see that she is a cultural resource management expert. And matter of fact, the title of her talk is Cultural Resource Management, a Career in Archaeology. She graduated with an MA in anthropology in 2012 and a concentration in bioarchaeology. And she experienced coming back here to ECU the fun of parking and trying to find parking just an hour or so ago. So again, please give a welcome to Lauren Souther.
Hello everyone. Like he just said, my name's Lauren Souther. I'm a bioarchaeologist/archaeologist for a company called New South Associates, which is based out of Stone Mountain, Georgia, but we have a Greensboro office that I work in. As a bioarchaeologist for the company, I work on projects that involve cemeteries, human remains along those lines, as well as prehistoric burials if those are encountered. When I'm not working on those types of projects, because those are not all the time, I work on anything and everything else in between. I work on all phases of archaeology, which I'm going to discuss here in a little bit. So I work on prehistoric, historic. I also do ground penetrating radar and magnetometry. I am technically a bioarchaeologist, but I do work in other capacities for the company as well. A little bit about my background. I went to UNC Greensboro for my undergrad. There I double majored in archaeology and anthropology, because there you can still do it separately. So I double majored there with a minor in classical studies. I was interested at the time in going into classical archaeology, so I did my field school in Greece. After that, I continued to work another 6 summers in Greece, because that was currently the track that I was on. However, I realized I was more interested in bioarchaeology, human osteology, what we can understand about individuals in a population from studying their remains and putting it into a context with the material culture found and building an understanding of the way these people lived. So I switched later on in my undergrad towards a bio focus and took all the physical anthropology classes that were offered. And then after I graduated, I was interested in, I was confused. I was interested in the academic route, but I was also interested in CRM, which I had heard about. With my bachelor's degree, and if you have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, you can get a job as a field technician or field tech with any CRM company, basically, as long as you completed a field school. And that's what I did for 3 or 4 years, just hopping from project to project. One thing about doing that is you're never full-time. It's very rare that you can get a full-time position as a field tech. You're just hired temporarily for each project. But I enjoyed it, but I wanted to do more. I was interested in the other aspect of the reporting and working with clients and working with the state and federal levels. So I went back to ECU with Dr. Perry doing bioarchaeology. My thesis was on late woodland Algonquian burials in the outer coast of North Carolina that I was fortunate enough to excavate a few of and then do some analysis at the Office of State Archaeology in regards to my thesis research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what CRM is, why we're needed, and a little bit about what the archaeological phases are that we complete as an industry, and then a little bit about my experience in archaeology in CRM, and what my advice is if you're interested in going into CRM. So what is CRM? CRM may be required as part of the environmental planning for any major construction on projects that fall under the guidance of the NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection Act, or under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. CRM may also be needed to comply with state and local regulations, depending on the type of project. What we try to do is we try to inventory sites, evaluate them, and we are trying to mitigate any adverse effects from any construction that's going to occur. This includes archaeological survey, recording of historic buildings. We have historians that work for our company. And that's their sole job, is that they go through trying to record any historic buildings that are within the project area. We also consult with Native American tribes if we come across prehistoric sites that involve burials. And every area has a every area has certain tribes that are in charge of a certain region that you will talk to. And you're evaluating these resources according to state and federal standards, and these always vary by state as far as the state level goes. And you're going to, in the end, give advice to landowners and developers to help them comply with these different laws. So what Section 106 is, which is very important if you are working in North American archaeology, is that basically 106 outlines that you need to consult with the lead federal agency, their state designates, which are usually Department of Transportation. We do a lot of work with various state departments of transportation for any federally funded project. And then we also talk with the State Historic Preservation Officer, SHPO, and determine the area of potential effects and if there are already any known cultural resources in the area. Sometimes there are already previously recorded sites that we have to go back and look at to see if they still retain integrity and how much they would be affected by any development. We also consult with any interested members of the public. You know, sometimes the projects are very public and people have an opinion about what they want to see happen to certain areas. We develop the appropriate survey strategies to identify these sites, historic structures, and other resources that are present in the APE. I don't know why I'm saying that. In the area of potential effects. So the Section 106 requires that these resources be taken into consideration when planning for any federally funded, permitted, and mandated projects. And when sites and structures are found, we then evaluate them for their eligibility for nomination to the NRHP. Without going into too much detail about what makes a site eligible, there's a list of standards that we go through, and these could be if, for example, if the site is linked to an important event in history, if it's a site that's linked to an important individual in history, or if the site can contribute to that specific period some knowledge that would otherwise be lost if the site was destroyed. After we find these sites, we record them to the appropriate state inventory form. Every state has a different way of doing this, and it takes some getting used to. We then analyze the artifacts and recover from all the sites, and then prepare them for curation at a federally approved facility. Sometimes if we're working for a private landowner, if things are found on the private landowner's land, they can keep the artifacts. It's their choice if they want to keep it by U.S. law, unless there are human remains, and they don't keep those. Then finally, the last part is we prepare a report describing the project's results and what our recommendations are. This is if we find sites, we can recommend them to not only the client but to the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, if they need to conduct further work to see just how important the site is before it's disturbed. Or if we know that there's definitely a very important site there, we can say that that avoidance should be used in any of the construction. And the SHPO can consult with the client and either uphold our recommendations, go against our recommendations, or usually they are on the same page with the company as far as what we suggest. So as far as the archaeological phases that we use in CRM, phase 1 is the most common and is probably what you would be doing a lot of the time if you start out doing archaeology in CRM. This is when we're conducting survey to identify the sites. And this involves systematic shovel testing, doing transects, where you're walking approximately every 30 meters and you're digging a shovel test. And these shovel tests are usually 30 centimeters wide and they go down to subsoil or they go down to a meter approximately. What we're doing with this is we're trying to see if there are any sites. When we find what's called a positive shovel test, that means we found artifacts in this shovel test. We then close in and we do shorter interval shovel tests around that positive. And this is to find what the boundaries are of the site, if it turns out to be a site, or in another case it could be an isolated find where there's a couple artifacts but no integrity to the site. So you do a closer interval shovel tests, and this is, again, finding the boundaries, and you're also trying to evaluate what the integrity of the site is. Because the next phase that you could go into is the site testing. This is if, yes, we know that there's a site, and this is if we think that it has integrity, or if we're unsure if it has integrity, we can recommend having a phase 2. And this is where we dig units on the site, usually 1 meter by 1 meter. And this is to see if there are intact cultural deposits within the site. From there, we can say, yes, it definitely is recommended to be registered with the National Register of Historic Places. Or even if we already say that it should be an NRHP site, they still may want to have additional testing. The final phase that you can go into, which is less common, is the data recovery. And this is the full-scale excavation. This is when you have a site that you know is important. However, there's no way of avoiding destroying the site. This is when you want to record as much as possible about the site and recover as much data as possible before it is affected by any development. Usually phase 3s, while they are so cool and I like working on those projects, usually don't happen because the client or the SHPO will say avoid it. Clients don't want to deal with the expense of having to do a full-scale excavation, as well as the public will always have an opinion in the area. They will usually not like the idea of an archaeological source being destroyed for a road or a factory or something along those lines. So that's a brief overview of the archaeological project phases. On top of that, there's ground penetrating radar, magnetometry, and these are the non-invasive ways of doing archaeology when you're going over the ground with a radar. And this can tell you if there are features beneath the surface. You can do a really cool way of, if there's a known site, you can even outline an entire prehistoric village and see the walls and post holes of the homes there without ever putting a shovel in the ground. It's becoming more popular. Our company is becoming very popular, being hired to do that because it saves a developer a lot of time to know, like, okay, yes, there's a site here without ever having to put a shovel in the ground, and we'll just go ahead and avoid it. And so it's extremely non-invasive archaeology, and the tribes really love it too, not having to worry about them disturbing any human burials. So what are my experiences in CRM? This is a picture of me in the Everglades. So obviously you do get dirty. So if you have a problem getting dirty, you're not going to be able to do CRM. A lot of the projects are very interesting. This project that I was working on in the Everglades, we were working on this awesome airboat. This is our reproduction of Crossing the Delaware, for those of you who are up on your history paintings. We took an airboat out every day to different tree islands in the Everglades. There I was evaluating whether or not there are human burials on these islands. I was going through thousands of bottle trying to identify 30 human remains in there. So there are all different types of projects. This one was both phase 1 and a phase 2 combined. If we had positive shovel tests, we would go ahead and put units in on the island. When I did find human remains, which we did a couple times, by by the rule of the Miccosukee and the Cherokee, not Cherokee, the Seminole who we were consulting with, if there were any human remains found, all the artifacts had to be reburied immediately on the island where they were found, and we had to leave the island. A lot of the projects that I've done are phase 1 surveys. Those are the ones that I field direct the most. I've done a lot of phase 2s and only a few phase 3 data recovery projects. So the idea of doing those full-scale excavations that you see related to archaeology, that you see in Greece, and stuff that I did before when I worked in Greece and Jordan, are not what you're going to be normally doing. You're digging those systematic, you're digging long transects of shovel tests and writing about shovel tests in your reports. And it's also important to say that, at least in the Southeast, CRM is not for everyone, because there are lots of horrible conditions working in the Southeast. For example, here's me in Louisiana. I was completely tangled up in briars and vines, and my coworker was generous enough to take a picture of me trying to get out. You have tons of briars, tons of vines, poison ivy, oak, sumac, heat and humidity, fire ants, chiggers, ticks, mosquitoes, poisonous snakes. In the Everglades, you had alligators and pythons. It's rough. It's the best way I can explain it. I mean, I would like to say you get used to it, but I mean, Louisiana, where I'm currently working, where this picture is taken from, is probably some of the worst conditions I've ever worked in doing this job. So you gotta really love your job to get through some of the things that you have to get through along these lines. You also can have to deal with injuries. I've been injured and had to leave the field twice on medical leave from torn muscles. So being in good shape's a good thing to be when doing this job. And you also, you travel a lot. And even though I have a more stable job where I'm on report, when I'm on projects, I go back and I'm writing up reports in the office, I still am traveling a fair amount throughout the year. And I'm back in North Carolina in my apartment, maybe, I can be there a few weeks to a month at a time, and then I get sent back out on another project. So the traveling is not for everyone. You're living in a hotel for the majority of your experience in CRM. But yeah, so my advice as far if you're thinking about going to CRM is get the experience. I know that's easier said than done, but with a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and if you've completed a field school, you can at least get a field teching position, usually with lots of different companies. This experience helps you not only get more jobs, and if you're interested in getting to a higher position like a field director, it also lets you figure out if this is a career for you, because CRM is definitely not for everyone. Like I said, I was debating whether or not I wanted to go into academia or do CRM as a career, and I found that I enjoyed it. But I did have coworkers who did it for a while, and they're like, okay, no, I want to get my PhD and I want to go the academic route. Be versatile. By this I mean, yes, my specialization is bioarchaeology. However, when I was here, I took GIS classes. In taking those classes, I learned how to use the Trimble, the GPS units, and then learned how to use the software that creates the maps that you use all the time in CRM. So that technological skill helps a lot. I also, I was fortunate enough they trained me in GPR and magnetometry. And I also took it upon myself to learn more about lithics and being able to identify different plate types and point types, because I'm not always going to just be doing burials and human remains. So if I have another skill that they can use me for, it keeps me employed, basically. So I would recommend, even though if you are interested in historic archaeology, get some at least rudimentary foundation in something else related to archaeology, because it makes you more hireable and more useful to a company. get your MA, and that's if you are doing the, want to be a field director and eventually a principal investigator, which is the highest level you can be within CRM. In CRM, you are only required to have your MA. We only have one person in the company who's a PhD, but everyone else has a master's degree. Along those lines, I highly recommend not going into working before you actually defend your thesis, because you would end up like me and working full time, and then you're going to be dragging out your thesis for a while because you're going to be pulled to two different places. And finally, talk to CRM companies, and this is part of the same thing as being versatile. This is talk to them about what they look for, or wish that they saw more students coming out of undergrad or graduate school having. I know most of them will say that they just want people with experience. And they deal a lot more with people that would go straight from undergrad to graduate school, and then they try to go into CRM, and they find that it's not for them, or really bad at their jobs. So, but they'll usually tell you, they'll usually say, we want someone who has GIS experience as well as, some other specialty that's their interest. GIS and geophys, which is the GPR magnetometry, those are probably the hottest specialties that companies want, because it's very rare that archaeologists have that going into jobs. And it's now what clients are looking for. They're looking for that non-invasive type of archaeology, people who can run a ground penetrating radar and say whether or not there's something below the surface without having to actually dig on the site. So I think that's it. And I guess I'll take questions now.
Let's have a round of applause for us, please. Outstanding questions.
So after you did your undergraduate and then your graduate school, and you worked under people the whole time, like identifying bones and stuff in osteology, whenever you began your career, did you feel like completely confident in identifying remains and
No.
saying, okay?
No, even though I was able to, it was a lot of pressure, especially when I was working in the Everglades, because they wanted on-site analysis. So I was going through, and I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that I'm going through tens of thousands of fossil bones, trying to pick out if there are any human remains in there, because it's the Everglades and tons of animals are dying on those islands, and sorting through those. So the few times that I said, yes, this was human, I had a book with me in the field that I kept checking over, and I'm not gonna lie, I was not very confident in my assessment and at the time, because you don't want to mess up on your job, but I seemed to do okay. I didn't get in trouble for anything. No human remains were sent back to the lab that weren't caught, so I think I did okay.
Other questions?
Like you said, you would phase 3 for like things that were going to have to be destroyed. What were they building? That was.
The longest one that I worked on was it was a nuclear facility that they were building on the river, and they already knew that there was a site there. So when we were hired, they knew that they had to do the phase 3 to recover as much of the site as possible before they can develop. And that entire time, because it was a prehistoric site, we were talking to the tribes, because the tribes were very concerned that there were unidentified burials on the property. And funnily enough, we ended up finding a human tooth, just a molar, in one of the units that we're excavating, and that turned into a big to-do. Like there was a burial ceremony with all the tribes represented, where it had to be buried on the site. And they ended up not developing it. After they went through with the phase 3, and I think maybe because of the uproar that the tribes had, the nuclear facility pulled out and decided not to build on the land. So, but that was what was going to go there. But yeah, that never happened.
Have a quick. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
So do you ever have time, do you ever work in a lab when you do analysis on bones? Or?
I do lab analysis on human remains. Sometimes I'll also do lithics. However, we have a lab that's in Stone Mountain, our main office, and we have full-time lab techs who do the pottery, the lithics, any of the historic stuff. We also have another lab person whose sole job is studying bones, but they honestly, unless we're doing a cemetery project, the bones never make it back to the lab. Because if you find human bones and you say yes, there are human bones here, you have to like leave it there, and you have to contact all sorts of authorities if you unexpectedly find human bone no longer in the project.
Yes, I heard that you are companies becoming more aware or aware of the sensitivity of the digs, because you indicated many Native American tribes really like the non-invasive strategies. Is that do you see that growing and continuing?
Yeah, that's definitely seems to be the trend in CRM, because the tribes are becoming every day more involved in projects, especially if they already know that there's a site there. So when a CRM company is hired, I mean, the tribes are already consulted, but if they have a say, they really do prefer GPR and they prefer magnetometry. I even know there are tribes in Tennessee who are training their own, like they have their own archaeologists, they're training their own people how to do GPR because they
And
want to be able,
GPR is short for what again?
ground penetrating radar.
Okay.
Trying to teach them, they've hired our company to actually teach them how to do this on their own, so that they themselves can evaluate sites if they think they're knowing, and then being able to read the data if something looks like a burial or something like that. They can go ahead and cut out the middleman and say, you know, you can't dig here. But it's definitely becoming, the non-invasive route, I mean, is becoming more and more popular. However, I mean, phase one is usually always the go-to, and it's cheaper than, it's honestly probably cheaper than GPR, because it costs a lot of money to hire the specialists to run the equipment and, you know, translate the data.
Follow-up question. Now, I really loved you sharing your picture of the most greatest time that you had out there. Now, what was your first experience? You know, that was one of them, but did it match your expectation? Because you always have these expectations before you get out in the field. What was it like your very, very first time?
The very first project was a phase one in Meridian, Mississippi. I showed up there. And this is also, I went to field school in Greece, so it's the first time I'm trying to do archaeology in the U.S. I was told I needed a compass, but I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing with that compass. I'd show up with my compass that I didn't know how to read, and I was put on a transect and told, like, okay, you know, this transect is 30 shovel tests long, going down a bearing of 270 degrees, and, you know, go. And I was just like left, and I'm like, I had no idea what you just said to me, standing there. And I had to learn, luckily that field director was patient enough to teach me how to do that, but the conditions were horrible. I was cut and bleeding pretty much every day from the briars there. I was getting eaten alive by chiggers and fire ants. And it was probably the first time saying, like, do I really want to do this? I'm not getting paid enough for this. But then you come to realize you say that a lot the longer that you do it. But I still do enjoy it. I enjoyed the aspect of doing field work and traveling around to different areas. And seeing different parts of the Southeast. They're always very interesting. But yeah, there have been a few times, especially that first project, you know, and I still have scars from Mississippi as well as places like Mississippi doing the field work there. So it was not what I was expecting at all, to answer your question. It was rough. Oh, and you can't have a fear of spiders, by the way. We've walked through a lot of spider webs. So any arachnophobia, you're either going to confirm it or you're going to get over it. Yeah, when I'm working in Louisiana, we have tarantulas. I didn't know they had tarantulas in Louisiana.
True.
So, yeah, you encounter a lot of poisonous snakes, but usually they're trying to get away from you.
I didn't know those were in America.
Are they invasive, like, or-
No, they're different tarantulas. I did not know they were in Louisiana, but they're in the Southwest. I did not know that they were, you know, as far east as Louisiana. Yeah, he's, so they're there, those are there. And yeah, Louisiana's awful. I do not recommend working there, unless your job makes you.
So for people that don't know what anthropology is or archaeology, how do you explain what you do?
Oh, how do I explain what I do then? I still get the questions of like digging up dinosaurs, or so you dig up dinosaurs, or I get a lot of questions from landowners like, found any gold yet? And I try to explain to them, you know, I don't even try to go into what my job is specifically because that just confuses them, but I'll tell them, you know, that, you know, we look for archaeological sites, either prehistoric populations, Native American sites, or historic sites, and we're basically trying to establish, you know, how important the site is before they develop. People, I never have anyone too confused beyond that. I mean, they really do think that we dig up gold all the time and just don't tell anyone. And people will also ask you, like, well, do you keep the valuable stuff for yourself? No. And plus, you don't find anything valuable. Just so you know, we don't find anything valuable doing this. But yeah, I never take a cut of any of the artifacts that I find, just so clear.
Any other questions? Let's have a round of applause again for Lauren. And we have one more activity to do, obviously.
What's this?
Hold on.
Oh, take a picture.
Yeah, I saw a box.
First, I want to give you our ECU Anthropology Alumni Lecture Award. This is to acknowledge your professional achievements and to give appreciation for graduating from our East Carolina University Anthropology Department. Thank you, Lauren. There you go. And it's official. It's official. And then we started something new. If you wouldn't mind, take a group selfie with us.
Selfie.
Yes.
All right. I've never done this
Yeah.
before.